So for all of you out there who aren't aware of what's been going on, particularly within the past few decades when it comes to the dating market, a lot of what we've seen right now pertaining to what is seen as a standard has increased to the point in which now we are seeing an acceleration which has gone beyond the projected path of what we would normally expect when it comes to the evolutionary path of mankind. Vision and XY graph, where each generation is represented by every X and expectation is represented by the Y axis. Now, for our great-great-grandfathers, they were at 1. Let's just say they're the starting point, but the expectation was at 1. Our great-grandfathers, their x-axis is at 2, while their expectation is at 2. Our fathers, they will be 3 in the axis, but their expectation is at 3.2, maybe 3.3. Us, being number 4 on the x-axis, have an expectation on the y-axis of about a 5. You see the lopsided expectations that we have been given as of this generation? For some reason, we have been the generation of men who are expected to do way more than our fathers have, especially our grandfathers, and most certainly our great-grandfathers. And for a lot of people who say, well, just self-improve, just focus on you, and it'll all be good. Well, I'll halfway agree to that. I'll halfway agree in the sense that in normal societies where things are not rigged, when laws are not skewed against men, and especially in places where functional men are seen as worthy enough of having feminine companionship, yes, self-improvement, focusing on just men, those things are absolutely great. But there's something that's bigger that's going on than just a bunch of millennial guys who refuse to self-improve. Yes, you do have those kind of men. There's a reason why the PUA and MGTOW movements have been as successful as they have been. However, we need to note this. I understand the need of evolution and that we need to reach new heights every generation. That is the responsibility of each new generation if it is to see the evolution of the human race. I get that. And that includes reaching new standards that even our forefathers weren't able to reach. And I will recognize the burden of performance as a real thing that is needed in order to progress the evolution of man. However, the expectations we are told to have, whether it's on the communitized side of just being the complete direct POS, or even on the American mainstream side of achieving everything that celebrities have done for over decades by the time you're in your 20s. Otherwise, you're seen as a loser. Does anyone not get how lopsided this is compared to what our forefathers were asked for? And also, does anyone not realize the kind of people who are asking for this and the lack of things they bring to the table, at least in compared to their foremothers? Especially someone who has been deemed select by the select crowd, which shout out to you guys for that. But we all need to come together and eventually realizing that this market is as rigged as it has ever was. This market is skewed so that not only the top 20%, but the top 10, 5, maybe 2% of guys are the only ones that will expect the majority of women they've been with to 1, fall for them, and 2, cooperate. Because we have plenty of men in the middle who say they're select and they're alpha and all sort of kind of stuff, and yeah, they get women, but usually it's either the ones that are easy to get, and I'm not just talking about the ones who put on the first night. Shout out to you ladies who actually know what you want. But I'm talking about the ones who will probably rate lower on the look scale. Or, if these women are decent looking, then they'll come with all sorts of drama and baggage and quote-unquote shit test. Which, I don't get why a lot of guys are still trying to excuse shit test as a part of female nature. If you're being shit tested, especially constantly, that's not female nature. She just doesn't like you, and you weren't her first choice. When is the manosphere going to teach that? But as far as the standards going up for being select and alpha, for having swag, whatever, imagine it like this. Back in the 70s, all you needed was maybe a lowrider. It could be a used lowrider, a lot of them were, along with some jive turkey talk and maybe a faux pimp outfit. You were good in the 70s. Now in the 80s, it increased to you having to, have some illicit drugs in your hand and maybe a Jerry curl too. And in the 90s, it went to full thug love culture in which you had to, at the very least, act as if you were hustling in the streets, hanging out with the boys, shooting dice, and doing all sort of kind of stereotypical shit that we've all been told is seen as having enough juice and swag. In the 2000s, you actually had to have been involved in some sort of street activity or had to have been caught up in the system or had your own studio, regardless if you couldn't prove it. But you had to be a part of that life. And as far as the 2010s, yes, we have seen the downright de-evolution of the image of the black man to the point in which unless you were a dreadhead wearing trap rap sounding baby kid, you were seen as lame. This should be a warning to all individuals out there who consider themselves alpha, select, having enough swag to be blessed by the community, or just blessed by certain women in the West in general. The standards for having swag, game, mouthpiece, whatever, that is not a stable point. It isn't some minimum qualification that you have to make. Mainly because, one, all those things are subjective, which I've already touched on plenty of times, how there are different kinds of swag. I have that as a video that I'm not sure a lot of you guys remember. And two, having game and swag all depends on what culture you're around and where you are. You could be seen as an educated you-know-what in Detroit, but be seen as a select man in Denver. You can be seen as a quote-unquote cornball in Atlanta, but as an alpha showpiece in Seattle. This is all subjective based on location and culture. And the other reason why I can't say why the select swag bar is not stable, isn't a good metric or a measure, is because it's becoming more rigid as the years go on. As I stated before, what was seen as select and swag in the 2000s will be seen as lame in the 2020s. The snapback and the gang signs and all this sort of kind of stuff, the mean shorty talk, back in the 2000s, which a lot of you guys who probably are watching, particularly those who have swag, probably see that as the good old days. So those are just the days when you were in. Some guys it's the 90s, some guys it's the 80s, I get it. But a lot of that doesn't work now. And it isn't because the barrier or the bar of having swag, game, being alpha, whatever, it hasn't necessarily shifted, laterally at least. It hasn't really changed from one trend to another. It's just devolved. And it's continuing devolving to the point in where now the guys who are considered alpha and have swag and can pull all the broads or whatever, especially in the community, forget go pieces. That was 2000s, as I said. You have to have basically holes in your teeth. You have to have grills that look like it's covering up cavities. You have to basically mummer half the damn time, like a Future video, or you're considered an educated lame. And as someone who considers himself in a reasonable, non-rigged society, as someone who might be more on the jawline or alpha, and trust me, I'm not just saying that myself, I have to point this out. The barrier for swag, for being alpha, for being select, is increasingly devolving to the point in which by the year 2030 or 40, you may just have to be or have to have been on death row in order to be seen as alpha and select. That's where we're going, especially in the community. And even to a degree outside the community. You have American society at large with the 80-20 rule. A lot of guys in the white manosphere talk about this as well. And while they have the 80-20 rule, the community has at best the 90-10 rule. And those numbers are becoming more narrow as time goes on. So what do we need to do about this? Especially if you call yourself alpha, having swag, all of that kind of stuff. There's one main thing that's driving all of this. And a lot of this alpha, swag, all this other kind of stuff is just a result of being reactionary to what derelict women want. Not all women, as I stated, but these derelict women who pull something out of their ass every 5 or so years on determining what a man is, who's worthy enough to get the blessings of the almighty Fash. Oh, look, We have been playing this reactive role for the past, I would say, at least 30, 40, 50 years, in which we have allowed women to determine what alpha is, what having, using the word swag to begin with, but what alpha is, what select is. And this needs to stop. We do not, and especially in this day and age, cannot determine what a woman is, nor should we. That's not our role. But at the same time, it is not a woman, particularly a derelict woman's role, to determine what a man is. We as men need to recapture the definition of what it means to be a man. Whether we have to do it via online or real life or whatever. The definition of manhood needs to have a firm definition. And that's something that we all, regardless of race, will have to agree to. 2, will have to be enforced by men. And 3, anyone who wants to not abide that rule, be cut out, be exiled. Because what it takes to be a man should be good enough to be considered select, alpha, having swag, etc. That's how it works in other communities that are functional. If you do the job, if you do the work, if you meet this standard, then you're good to go. You have the community's backing, you have the eldest blessing, and you have the woman's desire. And any derelict female who wants to make a big stink about it and tell that person who's done the work off, saying, oh, he doesn't make me wag, he's lame, and due to follow behind such derelict females, they need to be banished from said group. In a lot of communities where there's function and stability, there are clear-cut definitions of what it takes to be a man, whether it's being a hard-working man in the Latin and Middle Eastern communities, or being a smart, STEM-focused man like in the Asian and Indian communities. They have definitions. Their community has their backs because they achieve that definition of manhood, and their women will reward them for it. It is only in the Ados community, as well as increasingly the Anglo-white community, that they, for some reason, feel as if they need to go by what women say. And to that, I say that the buck stops here. We need to grab that definition back, determine what that definition is, and make sure it is enforced. And that this rapid, unreasonable expectation or vague, undefined expectation doesn't get pushed any further. Because this expectation of you having to be the top 1% just to get with an average chick, this is not going to end well on a social spectrum. And since the likelihood of men unifying in order to put a standard, a reasonable standard of what it is to be a man, be alpha, etc., is very unlikely in a society like America, here's something to remedy that in the meantime. Alright, cool. Self-improve. I completely agree with that. Self-improve, work on yourself, be all you can be, join the elite, etc. But if you want a woman or women in a society or a culture in order to share your, not necessarily share your resources with intentionally, maybe just a woman, but if you want a place in order to offer yourself to be part of said society or group or culture, make sure that it is a culture that is not rigged and is based on this unrealistic Western community, whether Negro or Anglo expectation. Do it for a place where they still have reasonable standards, given the slight increase in expectation for each new generation. Everyone else out there, always bet on X.